The house sat 4 miles past the last fence post, at the end of a track that turned to mud in spring and dust the rest of the year. The man who lived there had built it himself, or so's the story went in Caldwell, though by the time the story reached anyone who might have corrected it, he had been alone in it long enough that the detail no longer mattered. He was 34 years old. His name had been said aloud recently enough that he still recognized the sound of it in his own head, though he could not remember the last time someone had spoken it to his face. 3 years, perhaps. The man from the mercantile who brought supplies left them at the gate and counted his money without looking up. That was the extent of it. The roof leaked in 2 places. He had known this for 2 years and had not fixed it. There was no particular reason. The water came in near the east wall when the rains came hard, and he moved his cot 4 inches to the left, and that was the end of it. He did not consider it a problem worth solving. He did not consider much of anything worth solving anymore. He had been a carpenter once before. The hands remembered it. They built things without being told what to build: a new latch, a reinforced door frame, a shelf that did not sag. Then one morning in his 28th year, he woke up and the hands remembered, but the man who guided them had gone somewhere. The hands could not follow. He finished the work he was contracted for. He collected his tools. He rode west until the road stopped mattering. That was 6 years ago. On a Tuesday in late October, a woman appeared on horseback at the end of his track. He saw her from the window, a dark shape against the pale grass, moving slowly, stopping. He watched her check a folded paper against the fence post, then look up at the house. She sat there for a long moment. He did not move from the window. She was younger than him, perhaps 25. She wore a divided riding skirt and a canvas coat that had seen better weather. The horse she rode was sway-backed and gray at the muzzle. She dismounted slowly, like a person who hurt in places she had learned not to show. She walked to the gate. She did not open it. She stood with one hand on the post and looked at the track, then at the house, then back at the track. He watched her. She did not wave, she did not call out. After a while, she opened the gate and walked the horse through. She spoke first. "I was told you might need help," she said. He stood in the doorway with his hands at his sides. He had not opened the door for her. She had simply walked up the track to where he was standing, and he had not retreated. And that was the closest thing to an invitation she was going to receive. "I don't," he said. The word came out rough. He could not remember the last time he had said a word to another person's face. It felt like pulling a nail from old wood. Resistance, then give, then a dull shock traveling up the arm. She nodded. She did not argue. She looked past him into the house, at the single room that served as kitchen and bedroom, and everything else. At the counter, with its single plate and single cup, at the stove with its cold surface, and the stack of wood beside it that was running low. "You don't have to need help," she said. "I'm told you have a leaky roof and no one to mend it. I'm told you take your supplies from a man who won't look at your face. That's not need. That's something else." He did not answer. "My name is Clara," she said. "I cook, I mend. I can handle a roof patch until proper work can be done. I need a place through the winter. The woman at the church in Caldwell said you had room." There was a place. A narrow cot in the corner he had not used since the first year, when he had still believed he might one day want it. He knew it was there. He had not offered it. "I didn't ask," he said. "No," she agreed. "You didn't." She stood on his porch in her canvas coat with the wind picking up from the north, and she waited. Not expectant, not pleading. Simply present. In the way a person is present when they have nowhere else to be, and are willing to stand in the silence until it tells them something. He looked at her horse, at the sway in its back and the gray at its muzzle. He looked at her coat and the way it hung too loose on her frame. "You cook," he said. "Yes." A long pause. "Board and room," he said. "Until spring." She nodded once. He stepped aside. She walked into his house carrying her saddlebag and nothing else, and he followed her in and closed the door against the wind. She started with the stove. He was outside splitting wood when he heard the scrape of iron against iron, and when he came in with his arms full, she had the fire going and the kettle on, and was running a hand along the edge of the counter with her back to him. "There's salt pork in the pail," she said without turning, "and meal." I looked. He set the wood down by the stove. He did not know what to do with his hands after. He wiped them on his trousers and stood near the door, watching her move through the space, with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times in 100 different rooms. "There's a pot," he said, "under the bed. I found it." She was already pulling it out. She found the skillet, too, and the wooden spoons in the drawer that stuck, and the tin cups he kept on the shelf above the stove. She moved through his kitchen like she had lived there for years, touching only what she needed, asking nothing, finding everything. He sat down at the table. There was only one chair. He had never noticed. She did not seem to need one. She stood at the counter and worked the dough with her hands, and he watched the motion of her wrists and the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear without breaking the rhythm of the work. The smell filled the room before long. Salt pork and flour and the faint trace of something else. Rosemary, maybe, from a small pouch she produced from her saddlebag and clipped to the inside of the cabinet. He did not ask where it came from. He did not ask anything. She made beans and bread and a simple stew that had more flavor than anything he had eaten in 3 years. She set a plate in front of him without ceremony and sat on the floor with her own portion balanced on her knee. He ate. She did not watch him eat. She looked out the window at the dark. "Rain coming," she said. He glanced at the ceiling. The two wet spots on the east wall, old stains he had stopped seeing. He looked back at his plate. He ate slowly. He had forgotten what it was to taste something. She patched the roof on Thursday. He had not asked her to. He had gone out to check the woodpile and found her on the slope of the east side, hammering patches of tar paper into place with a rock from the yard. She worked without rope or ladder, bracing herself with one hand against the slope, striking with the other. The motion was steady. Her canvas coat was dark with sweat by the time she climbed down. "I found the tar paper in your barn," she said, brushing dust from her knees, "and the nails." He looked at the patches. They were uneven. They would hold until spring. "That'll do," he said. She nodded. She went inside and came out with 2 cups of water, and she handed him one and kept the other. They did not drink together. She sat on the porch step, and he stood near the woodpile, and there was the length of the yard between them, and neither of them moved to close it. But she had poured 2 cups, and he had taken one. That evening she asked him a question. "Do you remember what clover smells like?" He looked at her from across the room. She was washing the dishes in the basin by the stove, her back to him, her hands moving in the water. "Can't say I do," he said. She was quiet for a moment. She set a plate in the drying rack. "My mother used to dry it," she said, "between the pages of books. Said it kept the spiders out and made the room smell like summer. I haven't thought about it in years. I don't know why I said it." He did not answer. He did not know what to say. The rain started that night, a slow one from the south that settled in and would last until morning. He listened to it on the roof, not on the floor where the leaks were, but on the part she had patched. The sound was different there, duller. He lay awake and listened to the difference. She slept on the narrow cot in the corner, the one he had not used. She woke before dawn and made breakfast and did not speak until he was finished eating. "I saw the carpenter tools in the barn," she said. "You build things?" "Sometimes." She left the question there. She washed her hands and dried them on the cloth by the basin and did not ask another. He watched her. She folded the cloth and hung it on the hook by the stove, and her hands moved without hesitation, and he noticed that her fingers chapped from the cold and the work, and that she did not try to hide them. She had been somewhere before this. She had done things. He did not ask what. He went out to the barn and stood among his tools, and the rain came through the gaps in the boards, and he stayed there a long time without lifting anything from its hook. He stayed there longer than he needed to. By the third day, the rain had settled into something steady. It moved across the roof in sheets and found the places where the patches were newest. She had brought a pot from town, a small one, dented at the rim, and she set it on the stove, and the water came to a boil, and she fed him pinto beans and the last of the salt pork, and he ate standing at the counter because there were no chairs enough for two, and he had not thought to bring one from the barn. He had thought of it. He had stood in the barn and considered it. A chair from the long ago life, before the silence, before the distance he had put between himself and the world that had taken her, the one he had loved. The one who had died in the room where he now stood, on the cot where this new woman slept. He ate, and she watched him eat, and neither of them looked at each other directly. Outside, a horse passed on the road. The sound was wet, hooves on mud, and it faded and the rain came back and she said, "I can fix the porch step, the one by the door." "You don't have to. I know." She went out in the rain with her hands wrapped in a cloth, and she knelt by the step and she looked at the rot, and she did not look at him standing in the doorway watching. He was not watching because he wanted to. He was watching because he did not know what else to do with himself when she was near. She moved things with her hands, and the things stayed fixed. He had not fixed anything in a long time. He had let the world go soft around him, let the roof leak, and the step rot, and the walls settle into their slow collapse. And he had not cared because caring was the thing he had lost when he lost the ability to speak her name aloud. His wife, the one who had died. He had not said her name since the morning she stopped breathing. The woman in the rain worked at the step, and the step held when she tested it with her weight, and she stood and wiped her hands on her trousers, and she did not look up at him yet. She had learned not to look at him directly. She had learned that he could not bear it, the full attention of another person, the way it demanded something he did not have to give. She went inside and closed the door, and he stayed where he was, standing in the doorway, and the rain came in around him and he did not move. The step held for a week before she asked him for a saw. She needed a board. The step was still loose at the back where the rain had gotten under and softened the grain. She showed him the place with her finger, pressing the wood and watching it give. And he looked at the place, and he went to the barn, and he brought back a board he had planed 2 winters ago, the wood still tight-grained and pale, and he set it on the step, and she looked at it, and then she looked at him, and he understood that she was asking whether he meant to do it himself, or whether she should. "You do it," he said. "You've done the rest." She knelt and sawed, and he sat on the porch with his hands on his knees, and he watched. The saw moved through the wood, and the smell of it came up sweet and raw, sawdust and rain, and he breathed it in, and he did not leave. He stayed on the porch, and she worked, and neither of them spoke, and the afternoon passed, and the step was new, and she stood and brushed the sawdust from her knees, and she did not say thank you. She knew he had given her something he did not give lightly. The board from the barn. The planed wood from a time when he had still been a man who built things. She went inside, and he stayed on the porch, and the evening came slow and gray, and the lamp in the window came on, and he stayed outside longer than he needed to, listening to the sounds inside. Water in the basin, the click of a plate set down, the particular silence of someone making a space their own. He had not known he was lonely until she came. He had thought the silence was enough. He had thought that if he did not speak, he did not have to feel the weight of speaking into an empty room. But the room had been empty, and now it was not, and the difference was in his chest, a tightness he did not have a name for. And he sat on the porch, and he watched the last light go, and he thought about the sawdust smell, and the way her hands moved, and the way she did not ask for more than he could give, and the way she had fixed the step and the roof and the door, and the way he had let her, and the way he did not want her to leave. He did not go inside until the cold came. She had left a plate for him on the stove, beans again, salt pork, a cup of water. He ate standing at the counter, the way he always did, and he heard her breathing in the corner where the cot was. And he finished the plate, and he washed it, and he set it by the basin, and he lay down on the floor, where he always did, and the rain came through the old part of the roof, and he did not move to avoid it. On the 9th day, a woman came from town with a basket of eggs, and she stood on the porch, and she did not come in. She had heard. She had heard was someone at the widower's place, someone who had arrived on the stage and who had not gone further. The woman on the porch looked at him standing in the doorway with the light behind him, and she said, "How do you get on with the new boarder?" "Fine. Your roof still leaking?" "Some." "Your step looks new." "Yep." The woman looked past him into the room where the cot was made up, and the stove was clean, and the counter was clear of the clutter that had lived there since before he could remember. And she said, "She a good worker?" "She is." "Well," the woman said, and she set the basket on the porch rail. "I brought eggs. For her. She'll need them, cooking for a man like you." He did not say thank you. He did not open the door wider. He stood in the doorway, and the woman looked at him, and she looked at the room, and she looked at the step that was new, and she went back down the porch, and she did not say anything else. He heard the buggy on the road. He heard it fade. He picked up the basket, and he went inside and he set it on the counter, and she was there, in the corner, folding a shirt, his shirt, the one she had washed without asking, and she said, "Someone came? Eggs for me?" From town looked at the basket, and she looked at him, and he was holding the shirt she had folded, and he had not realized he was still holding it, and she said, "I'll scramble them for supper." He set the shirt on the counter. He went to the barn. He stood among his tools, and he did not work, and the light came in through the gaps in the boards, and the dust moved in it slow, and he stood there, and he breathed, and he thought about the way she had washed his shirt, and the way she had folded it, and the way she did not make a thing out of doing things for him. He came back at supper, and she had set the table, 2 plates, 2 cups, a chair he had not seen before, pulled from somewhere, the back room maybe, where the old things lived. She had found a chair. She had set the table for two. He stood in the doorway. "Sit," she said. "It's ready," he sat. She sat across from him. He looked at the plate, and the eggs were scrambled with something green. Wild onion, maybe. He from the field behind the barn. And the plate was full, and the cup was full. And he picked up his fork, and he did not eat yet. He looked at her. She was looking at her plate. She was not looking at him. Her hands were flat on the table, chapped and rough, and she had not tried to hide them, and she had not worn gloves, and she was here, sitting across from him in a chair she had found, and the table was set for two, and he opened his mouth, and the word came out before he could stop it. Her name. He said her name. He had not meant to. He had not planned to. It came out of him the way the first word comes out after a long silence. Rough, uncertain, not ready. And she looked up, and her hands went still on the table, and he saw her face, and she was not smiling, and she was not crying, and she was something he did not have a word for, a stillness that was not calm, but was not the opposite of calm. And she did not move, and he did not move. And the lamp on the wall threw light across the table. Between them and the eggs were getting cold, and he said it again. Her name, softer the second time. The way you say something you have not said in a long time, testing whether the word still works, whether the mouth still remembers how to shape it. She said, "I know." And he understood that she had known all along that he had not spoken, that the silence was the shape of him, the way the rotted step was the shape of him, the way the leaking roof and the empty table and the single plate at the counter were all the shape of a man who had let the world go quiet, because the world had taken from him the thing he could not bear to lose. She said, "I know," and he said, "I know you know." And she put her hand on the table, palm up, open, the chapped fingers and the rough palm and the small red cuts from the saw, from the tools, from the work of making something out of what he had let go to ruin. She put her hand on the table, and she left it there, and she did not look away from him, and she did not say anything else. He looked at her hand, he looked at the eggs. He picked up his fork and he ate and she ate. And the lamp burned and the rain came through the old part of the roof and dripped into the bucket she had set there, and the bucket was almost full, and neither of them moved to empty it. The table was set for two. The chair she had found held her weight. The shirt she had washed hung on the hook by the door. The step by the porch held firm. He finished his eggs, she finished hers. He set his fork down, and she set hers down, and the plate was empty, and the cup was empty, and he was still sitting across from her, and she was still sitting across from him, and the distance between their chairs was the distance of a table, and nothing more. He did not reach for her hand. Not yet. The moment was not that moment. The moment was the first word after a long silence, and the word was a name, and the name was hers, and she had heard it, and she had not turned away. He stood. She did not move. He took the plates to the basin. He washed them. The water was cold, and his hands were rough, and she was still sitting at the table behind him, still watching, and he dried the plates. And he hung the cloth on its hook, and he turned, and she was there standing now, her hand on the back of the chair she had found. The room was small. The cot was in the corner. The stove was warm. The rain was in the bucket, and the step was new, and the roof still leaked in the old part. He stood at the counter. She stood by the table. The lamp burned between them, and neither of them moved to end what the night was asking. He walked to the door and opened it. The rain had thinned to a mist that hung in the air like something undecided. The yard was dark and the road was mud, and the cedar post at the gate stood gray against the black of the fields. He stood in the doorway, and the cool air came in, and she came to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her shoulder not touching his. She was looking where he was looking, at the dark, at the nothing. At the gate he had walked through alone for 3 years. She did not speak. She did not ask what he was doing. She stood beside him, and she looked at the same dark, and after a while her hand came to rest on the door frame, her fingers near his, and her little finger moved 1 inch and it touched his. The lightest pressure, the whole of it. He did not move. She did not move. The mist settled on the porch rail, and the rail was wet, and the cedar smelled the way it always smelled after rain. He closed the door, but he did not latch it. She went back to the table, and she sat, and he stood by the basin, and the lamp burned low, and neither of them spoke, and that was the new thing, the not speaking that was not the same as before. Before, his silence had been a room with no door. Now it was a room with the door open, and someone sitting in the chair across from the empty chair, and the chair was not empty. He brought 2 cups of water to the table. He sat across from her. The wood was solid, and the scratches were old, and the legs of the chairs were uneven in the way they had always been uneven. She drank, he drank. The cups were the same cups, and the water was from the well, and neither of them said anything, and the hour moved the way hours do when they are full of something that has no name. She stood, he stood. She folded her hands, and he watched her fold her hands, and she said, "I should go to the cot." He nodded. She crossed the room, and she sat on the edge of the cot, and she unlaced her boots, and she set them by the wall, and she looked at him, and he was still standing by the table, and the lamp was between them, and the distance was the room, and the room was full of the thing they had not said. He went to the chair by the stove. He did not sit. He stood with his hand on the back of it, and he looked at her, and she looked at him, and the lamp burned, and the rain was gone, and the roof leaked in the old part, and the step was new, and she was in his cot, and he was in his chair, and the night was the longest night and the shortest night, and when he finally sat and closed his eyes, he could still feel the 1 inch where her finger had touched his. She woke before him. The light was gray, and the cedar smell was back, and the cot was not her cot, and the room was not her room, and for one moment she did not know where she was. Then she remembered the rain, the name, the finger on the doorframe. She sat up, and he was asleep in the chair by the stove, his head against the back of it, his hands open on his knees. He had not moved in the night. She could see the lines of his face in the gray light, and the lines were not hard anymore. They were tired in the way that tired is when it is the good kind. She put on her boots. She stood. He did not stir. She went to the basin, and she washed her face, and she dried it with the cloth that hung by the basin, and she looked at herself in the small square of mirror by the door. She did not know the woman in the mirror. She looked the same, and she looked different. She went to the stove, and she opened it quietly, and she put wood in, and she lit it, and the fire caught, and the room began to warm. She found the flour in the tin by the counter. She found the salt pork in the bowl. She found the eggs in the basket on the shelf. She cracked the eggs into the pan, and the sound was small and domestic, and the sound was the sound of a morning that was not like other mornings. And she stood at the stove, and she cooked, and he slept in the chair, and the light came through the window in the way that light comes through a window when the day is deciding to be kind. He woke to the smell of eggs and the sound of the fire and the woman at the stove. He did not move. He watched her. She was wearing the same shirt she had worn the day before, and her hair was loose the way it had been loose when she arrived, and she was standing at his stove in his kitchen making breakfast, and he did not know what to do with the thing in his chest that was not pain. She turned and she saw him and she said, "Sit." He sat. She put the plate in front of him. Eggs, salt pork, the last of the bread. She sat across from him. The table was the same table. The chairs were the same chairs. The distance was the distance of a table, and nothing more. He ate. She watched him eat. He finished the plate. He looked at her and he said, "Thank you." His voice was rough from the night before, but it was there. The word was there. She nodded. She took the plate. She washed the plate. She hung the cloth on its hook. The days that followed had a shape. She woke first. He woke to the smell of something cooking. They ate. He worked outside, and she worked inside, and sometimes their paths crossed in the doorway, and sometimes they did not. And neither of them minded the crossing, and neither of them minded the not crossing. The roof got fixed on a Tuesday. The loose step held. The cedar post at the gate stood gray against the green of the new grass, and the road was dry, and the fields were open, and the world was the same world, and it was not the same world. He learned the sound of her boots on the porch. She learned the sound of his axe in the morning. He learned that she sang when she thought no one was listening, and she learned that he stood at the gate at dusk and looked at the road and did not look at the road. They did not speak of the night of the rain. They did not speak of the name. They did not speak of the finger on the doorframe. The things they did not speak of were the shape of the room, and the room was the shape of the life they were building without words. A month passed, then two. The general store in town had a new bolt of blue cloth on the counter, and she touched it when she went in for salt, and she did not buy it. And he saw her not buying it. And the next week the blue cloth was on the table in his kitchen. She held it, and she looked at it, and she did not say where it came from, and he did not say where it came from. And she cut the cloth, and she sewed, and the shirt she made was blue, and she wore it on a Sunday when they walked to the creek and back. He stopped walking to the gate at dusk. He walked beside her. The road was the same road, and the gate was the same gate, and the cedar post was the same cedar post, and the distance between them was the distance of a step, and sometimes less. She slipped on the path coming back, and his hand found her arm and held, and neither of them said anything, and the sun was going down, and the light was gold, and the creek was running, and they stood on the path with his hand on her arm, and her eyes were bright, and his face was still. He let go. She did not move away. The light faded, and the stars came out, and they walked back to the house. She lit the lamp. He sat in his chair. She sat in her chair. The distance was the distance of the table, and the lamp burned between them, and the night was quiet, and the step was new, and the roof held. And she said, "Stay." He looked at her. She was looking at the lamp. She did not look away. He said, "I am here." She nodded. She did not ask him to come closer. He did not come closer. The night settled around the house, and the lamp burned, and the two chairs were close enough that their shadows touched on the wall. He sat in his chair, and she sat in hers, and the distance was the distance of a table, and the table was enough.